Learning Portuguese before you move to Portugal can feel impossible, especially when no one around you speaks it. You're starting to wonder, well, how am I supposed to practice a language when I've got no one to talk to? So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to build a practice routine that's broken down into reading, writing, speaking, and listening that's going to work for you even if you live in Kansas, Cornwall or Canberra. If you're new here, I am Liz and I learned Portuguese from scratch when I was living in England at university, and now I teach expats how to become confident before they even get on the plane. Just like Math, one of my students who was still living in the UK when they started learning, and now they're here in Portugal, and because they put in that work up front, they're now enjoying driving out to remote spots to get coffee, making friends with their neighbours, and have even joined a local hiking group. We recently did a live interview that I'll link in the description so you can hear their whole story because it's so cool, and it started outside of Portugal. So if they can do it, you can too. So if you're serious about getting to the same level, stick around for this super helpful breakdown of how to structure your study and which materials to use. So the first thing I want to tackle is a question I get all the time, which is how often should I be studying? And my answer is always little and often is best. I think it's so much better to put aside 30 minutes to 1 hour about 4 times a week, or 5 if you can, and do that consistently rather trying to do a whole chunk of like 3 or 4 hours once a week. Because the way that language learning works, I recently did a video about this with the brain science of it all, but the way that our minds work is we need to be reminded of information often for our brain to register that it's important and it should be remembered. So little and often. It can be as little as 30 minutes a day, but just to keep it consistent. The other tip I have for you is to make sure that you are putting equal emphasis on those 4 areas: the reading, the writing, the listening, and the speaking, because you might have seen this meme before about language learning, and it is so true. We are all so confident when it comes to reading, a little less confident at writing. We're often really worried about listening, and then when it gets to speaking, everything falls apart. So that's why you need to make sure that you're not just playing it safe in your comfort zone, just reading things and doing bits of writing. We've really got to work on those much more difficult skills of listening and speaking as well. So let's start with the easy one, reading. So even when you're alone, reading is really going to immerse you in the language's rhythm and structure. I often recommend that you start simple and use something like a children's book to start your learning, or even some of these short stories that I mentioned in my previous video on the top resources that we are using at the moment inside the program to help our students build their skills. The series is called Storyglot and it starts all the way at A1, so it can be a really nice place to start if you are looking to build your reading skills. Another really good tip would be if you already have some kind of daily reading habit, maybe you like to go through the news, what I want you to do is switch it out for news in Portuguese. So you could use a website like Euronews, for example. I always recommend because it's quite short and sweet, the little articles that they have there. And this is going to be a really good way to make sure that every single day you're doing a little bit of reading. Or if you are on social media quite a lot and you are reading things like Instagram posts, make sure that you're following some news outlets in Portugal, and that way you can do simple things like read a headline and read a short caption, and you're really getting some practice and some day-to-day use of Portuguese, but also staying on top of current events that are happening there. And even if you feel silly, it's a really good idea to read out loud. This is going to help you practice your pronunciation skills. I've got tons of videos on this channel if you do need help with your pronunciation, as well as a free pronunciation guide that is linked in the description that goes through 7 of the most difficult sounds. So if you need to start, that's where to do it. Reading aloud is going to bridge the gap between reading and speaking. So it's a really, really good idea to do this. If not daily, definitely on a weekly basis. I always have my students do this inside the program, and one of my students, Sarah, one of her goals when she started was to actually be able to read a bedtime story to her 2-year-old granddaughter that's living here in Portugal. And she recently did it for us in our pronunciation workshop. She read The 3 Little Pigs and it sounded so good. So I can promise you that this is a really good way to both build your vocabulary and improve that pronunciation. So let's progress in order of difficulty here. Now let's get to the writing. So writing is going to help you to move that kind of passive vocabulary that you've been picking up throughout your reading and put it into active use. And one of the best things I recommend is to keep a daily journal in Portuguese. You could write just 1, 2, or 3 sentences every day to talk about what you did and what you ate, for example, and that's going to be a really, really good way to keep practicing those writing skills. Of course, this is where AI can come in and help you with this. It could give you prompts and things to write about, and you can also allow it to check your Portuguese as well at the end. So tools like ChatGPT or language tools can actually correct you, but also rephrase your sentences so they sound a little bit more natural. So even though we can't take what AI says as the 100% truth, it's probably going to go a long way to help you improve those writing skills. Now, if you have some friends or family that are already living in Portugal or that speak Portuguese, for example, a really good way of practicing your writing as well would be either to write them a WhatsApp message or write them an email. If you commit to doing this once a week and giving them an update on what you're doing in your life, this is a really nice way to practice writing. So it's kind of like bringing a pen pal into the 21st century. And this is something that my students often do when they've signed up to have a language exchange with somebody. In between their speaking sessions, which I recommend they do once a week, which we'll come on to in the speaking session, in between those sessions, they will exchange messages over text as well. So it's a really good way to keep up the vocabulary that's building there in your head. It's a really good way of keeping that accurate and consistent. So next up we have listening. I just did 2 new videos on this that talk you through the different types of exercises that you can do to train your listening, and also one that actually gives you a listening challenge that I did with my students inside Portuguese Pro, so you can actually put your listening to the test. But basically one of the key differences we talked about was extensive and active listening. So extensive listening is when you're going to be listening to something long form. So maybe it's a whole TV show, maybe it's the radio, maybe it's a podcast. And these are really good things to have going on in the background while you're doing something else. So I really want you to make sure that you're immersing yourself in Portuguese daily. So this might mean while you are cooking or washing the dishes, you have the radio on in Portuguese, for example. And this is going to be a way to just gradually train your ear to the rhythm and the sounds of Portuguese, but not be able to follow every single word. That's when active listening comes in. So again, once a week, I want you to set yourself the challenge of listening very intently to a short piece of audio that's maybe 1 or 2 minutes long. This is active listening, where we're actually trying to understand what's going on in that listening clip. So again, in these videos, I go over how to do this in detail, but essentially you want to have a pen and paper and be writing down all of the words that you understand in order, so you can then start to get a gist of what is happening in that text. So again, some of the resources that I have recommended for this is once again the Euronews website in Portuguese, because they have very short news clippings that are really good. Or something like a podcast like Learn Portuguese with Maria, where she speaks very slowly. If you chop up just 1 minute of speech and really focus intently on listening, this is how we are going to improve those listening skills. And don't forget, you can of course watch TV with subtitles. Depending on your level, I would actually recommend putting the subtitles in Portuguese and listening in Portuguese, because that's how I think you're actually going to get the most out of it in terms of understanding and picking up the language and the way people speak. And of course, don't forget music. I've done a few videos on this and I absolutely love the app Lingo Clip that I recommend to everybody, so you can listen along to some fado or some pop and follow along with the lyrics. It's going to be really great for your listening. The one thing I want you to remember though is that you need to do the active listening as well as the extensive listening. You can treat the active listening kind of like a gym session. Even if you only do this for like 20 minutes a week, that is going to be so much more beneficial than just hours and hours and hours of extensive or passive listening. So please make sure that you're scheduling in that time to do the active listening. It's really going to pay off. And finally, we have speaking that everybody dreads. I know it is the scariest part, especially when you're alone, but it really is the most powerful. So some ways that you can practice your speaking when you're not around Portuguese speakers would be to kind of shadow the way Portuguese people speak. I've done a video already on this really cool tool called Youglish, where you can actually type in a word. Say you're interested in football, for example. You can type in a word and it's going to bring up lots of videos in that language that you are trying to learn, and it's going to have the subtitles. So this would be really great for you to listen to a short clip, pause it, and then say that phrase yourself out loud, trying to mimic the tone and the rhythm of the Portuguese. This is something that I would do a lot with the TV. I'd be watching like a reality show, for example, and then when somebody says a phrase that I think, oh, that's quite useful, I might want to be able to say that in real life, I would pause it and then try and say it exactly the way that they had said it as well. So it makes it feel really natural. Even if it feels silly, you can also talk to yourself. You can narrate what you're doing as you're going about the house. You can describe what you see when you are out and about. You could make a to-do list out loud in Portuguese, for example. These are all really good ways of just getting the Portuguese on the tip of your tongue, because this is the difficulty when you are practicing speaking. You've got to get what's in here out through here, and it takes a long time when you very first start. One of my students yesterday described it as like when a computer is buffering and it's like trying to work, but there's a slight delay there, and that's very normal in the beginning. So the more you speak out loud, the easier that is going to get. If you are doing things like this, or the reading aloud that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it would be great to record yourself as well. It adds a bit of pressure, which will emulate the pressure that you have in real life to speak, but also it means you can listen back to it and actually say to yourself, okay, where did I go wrong here? How could I improve? Of course, this is all going to become so much easier when you actually have a Portuguese person to speak to. And just because you're not in Portugal yet, it doesn't mean that you can't connect with those people. It's a really big part of my program for people to actually match up with a native Portuguese speaker and do what we call a language exchange. So you find somebody who wants to improve whichever your native language is, whether that's English, French, Spanish, and then they will help you with your Portuguese. I did a whole video on this recently, so you could definitely watch that for a bit more detail. But essentially, it's very scary. The scariest thing is going to be putting yourself out there to find a person and showing up to the first few sessions. And unfortunately, there is no other way to go about it. You just have to go through that really awkward, embarrassing part to get to the other side, where you will have somebody that you can regularly talk to. So this is going to be great because they can correct you, they can give you more ideas about how you would say something more naturally. And this is honestly where my students start to go off the charts with their success and their progress, because this is the fundamental thing about learning a language. You need to be able to speak in real life. So just because you are not in Portugal yet, it doesn't mean that you can't get started on this and see amazing progress, because I've seen it time and time again with my students. Like Matthew, for example, he found somebody through university because he's a student at the moment, and this was so impressive. Within a few sessions, they were already talking about things like climate change and politics. So really, it does help your Portuguese come on in leaps and bounds. So which one are you going to get started with? Let me know in the comments which was the most exciting and inspiring for you to try out. I'd love to hear how you get on. And if you want to build a real life Portuguese routine that is going to fit into your life right now, wherever you are, then I would love you to join my free beginners workshop. I'll walk you through how to get confident with the basics, avoid the biggest mistakes, and help you start speaking sooner than you think. Just visit the link in the description. And let me know, where are you learning Portuguese from right now? Put your location in the comments. You may find somebody else who is around you and doing the exact same thing. Don't forget to check out the videos on speaking and listening that I mentioned. If you found this helpful, these are going to dive into a lot more detail, so you should watch those next. I'll be back next week with more tips and tutorials on how to build your confidence and conversation skills in Portuguese. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. Ciao for now.